Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Russia's mindset is imperialistic and the free world needs to hold firm. This from Finland's top diplomat speaking exclusively to TVP World. Elina Valtton also confident tonight that America will defend every inch of the NATO alliance. More in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. Blackouts in Russia as Ukraine targets energy facilities. France's Prime Minister quits after just a month in office. And Polish farmers face the fallout of a hot and dry summer. Another night, another drone sighting over European airspace, this time in Norway. It comes after a spate of incursions over recent weeks in the likes of Germany, Poland and Denmark. Officials say these are no coincidence, putting the blame at Russia's feet. Paweł Trzaskowski reports.
This time it was Norway. A reported drone sighting disrupted the operations of Oslo International Airport. This incident follows a halt of Lithuania's main airport on Sunday after dozens of hot air balloons used by cigarette smugglers breached the country's airspace coming from Belarus.
The incident affected about 30 flights. Early data shows that around 6,000 passengers were impacted.
And in recent weeks, other European countries, including Germany, Denmark, Sweden and Poland, have experienced similar incursions attributed to Russia. A pattern rather than a coincidence, according to Polish officials.
These are no chance events. There are too many of these incidents. They affect sensitive areas. For us, this is a clear signal to urgently ramp up defense capabilities of our critical infrastructure against drone attacks.
We strongly condemn Russian provocations targeting the European Union member states, including incursions into their airspace.
And these incidents are a recent addition to Russia's arsenal of disruptive strategies.
This is more of this gray zone type of activity. We keep talking about this, that the Russians are active in the gray zone. They're active in what we call hybrid warfare, and it's intensifying.
For some of these Russian measures, such as the use of balloons, NATO has no playbook.
We don't train our fighter pilots to act against these kinds of targets, balloons specifically. In this case, we train them to fly air policing patrols.
In some areas, individual countries are fending for themselves. After last week's disruption at the Munich airport, Germany was to install a laser system to ward off incoming drones. Denmark banned all civilian use of drones for a week when Copenhagen held the European political summit. A more unified response is also brewing, though, in the form of a drone wall, an allied network of drone detection and interception systems. All this does not mean, though, that NATO is now defenseless against such incursions. Finnish Minister of Foreign Affairs Elina Valtton told TVP World that NATO's answer to the incursions was the right one.
I think the response that NATO has operationally been able to produce is exactly the right one. And this is, of course, something we should be continuing on.
But as Russian disruptions intensify, NATO's responses should too. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
And we'll have the full exclusive interview with Finland's Foreign Affairs Minister Elina Valtton later in the show. Ukraine has hit back at Russian energy infrastructure overnight, leaving tens of thousands of people without power in Belgorod and occupied Crimea. Our correspondent Alex Kadier has more.
Well, an exchange of strikes on energy infrastructure in Ukraine and in Russia over the last 48 hours. There had been a promise made by President Zelensky that any blackouts in Kyiv would result in blackouts in Moscow, and that retaliation is what we've seen from Ukraine in the last 24 hours or so. 2 strikes targeting the same power station and other energy infrastructure in the Belgorod region of Russia, where the local authorities say 40,000 people are without power as a result of those strikes, and hospitals are on backup power as well. We had seen that promise from the Ukrainian side, more capable now than they were last year to hit back and create blackouts in Russia. Clearly an escalation, or certainly an increase increase in Ukrainian capabilities to hit back on Russian targets following blackouts here in Ukraine. Of course, the scale is different, but the impact seems to be quite similar. Still, a frustrated President Zelensky asking for his Western partners to do more, to have a more serious response to those widespread Russian attacks, particularly those targeting the Lviv region in western Ukraine, as we've seen, because that is so close to EU and NATO borders, particularly the border with Poland. In Kiev, I'm Alex Kadye for TVP World.
Staying with Russia now, and President Vladimir Putin is telling Ukrainians in the country's occupied territories to get a Russian passport or leave. The decree has prompted a warning from the Europe Council's Human Rights Commissioner, telling TVP World that it directly violates international law. Sonia Agata-Bischan explains.
Get a Russian passport or leave, is the message coming from a decree by Vladimir Putin. The deadline for Ukrainians in the newly Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine to do so expired in September. According to the Council of Europe Commissioner for Human Rights, the requirement is a violation of international law.
You are Ukrainian, and you are ordered to somehow stop being a Ukrainian and be something else? That's nonsense, and it's an outrage to human dignity. So it's good that international law follows that and makes it absolutely clear. A country cannot invade another country, impose itself on the territory, and then somehow dictate nationalities.
Following the 2022 Russian invasion, Ukraine's control of its lands was significantly affected. As of September 2025, Russia occupies approximately 20% of Ukraine. To date, Russia has issued passports to over 3.5 million residents of occupied territories of eastern Ukraine.
These are 3.5 million passports, many of which have been oppressively imposed on people who want to be and who are proud to be Ukrainian.
Those who failed to obtain Russian passports in time shall be considered foreigners, having a number of their rights curbed in turn.
They would require to obtain visa, they would require to receive the permit for work. So basically they would be foreigners in their own home.
Since Putin's decree on deportation is in force, they also risk being expelled from their homes. But there are more issues associated with the forceful imposition of Russian passports.
Forcible passportization, it is not only about rights or abuse of these rights. It is mostly about duties. And according to the Article 59 of the Russian Constitution, each boy and then young man has this duty to serve into the Russian army. The main goal of the Russian Federation is to make Ukrainians fight against each other.
And conscription of Ukrainians into the forces of the Russian Federation would be a war crime.
According to human rights experts, the forcible imposition of Russian passports threatens Ukrainian identity itself.
When Russians are imposing their passports and other documents on Ukrainians, they would like to have the Russian nation strengthened and the Ukrainian nation just disappeared. And this war is not only about territories. This war about people, about language, about identity and about history.
The Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has strongly protested the so-called autumn draft for military service launched by Russia on October 1st, including in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Agata-Bischan.
Political drama in Lithuania over the government's decision to hand control of the Ministry of Culture to a party critics say threatens democracy and freedom of expression. As Gabriela Jelonek reports, protesters have taken to the streets, with the minister in charge stepping down after a week in the job.
Last Friday, after protests across Lithuania, Ignotas Adamavičius from the Nemunas Down party resigned as a culture minister amid criticism for his incompetence. However, this was not enough to stop the demonstrations. Artists are still gathering in the streets to protest the populist and the Eurosceptics party control over the ministry. As they say, it's a threat to culture, democracy and freedom of speech.
We see Nemunas Dawn as a very dangerous construct for our state. This is obviously a pro-Russian movement. We do not agree in any way that this party should be in the Ministry of Culture.
The leader of Nemuna's Dawn party, Remigius Žemaitaitis, is on trial for inciting hatred and denying the Holocaust. Žemaitaitis also questioned providing support to Ukraine and criticized the significant increase in defense funding. At the end of September, a new government was approved in Lithuania, headed by Social Democrat Inga Ruginienė. So far, it has been criticized by protesters for keeping the populist Nemunas Dawn party in the ruling coalition. If we give in now, we will be facing the fate of representatives of the cultural world in Hungary and Slovakia, claimed protesters from numerous museums, galleries and libraries.
Because in the last 35 years, Lithuania has achieved a lot and the level of freedom of speech is high. Similar to the cultural contribution to the world, no one wants to lose those great achievements in one day.
Protests are ongoing in more than 300 places with support from the international community, including Poles, which are the largest minority group in Lithuania, with over 183,000 citizens.
The Polish community is not indifferent because it is our common goal to ensure that the Ministry of Culture is not in the hands of a political anti-Semitic party.
Very often we want Lithuanians to be present in our affairs and defend our causes. So without our presence in Lithuanian affairs, we cannot expect Lithuanians to be present and defend our causes. That is why we are here today.
The Nemunas Dawn party stated that they would like the Ministry of Culture to remain in their control, but would negotiate a reshuffle of ministries. However, Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda commented on the protest and emphasized that he remains open to dialogue, but called for respect from the other side and understanding that the government faces complex challenges. For TVP World, Gabriela Jelonek.
He was Prime Minister of France for 27 days. Now, Sébastien Lecornu is walking away, his dramatic resignation deepening the country's political crisis and marking the third time a Prime Minister has quit the role in the last year. Let's go live to Paris now, where our correspondent Kazimierz Szweszak is standing by. Good evening, Kazimierz. So how has this all played out and what happens next?
Good evening, Aaron. Well, in the morning, French President Emmanuel Macron received the resignation of now former Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu. And it was only hours after Lecornu revealed the names of his new cabinet. And these names are one of the main reasons behind this resignation, because 12 out of 18 were already there in the government of the predecessor of Lecornu, François Bayrou. So basically all major political parties in France, the far right, the far left, have all protested, said that there is basically no change and that they have no trust that the government of Lecornu would be able to provide a budget bill for 2026, which would be approved by the entire political scene in France. Keep in mind that no political party or coalition in France has an outright majority in the National Assembly, which means that this political deadlock is continuing. It is a huge political crisis. Lecornu has become the shortest ruling leader of the government in France since 1958. So that only goes to show you how big of a crisis this is. And all of that is in the context of France's growing public deficit at close to 6% of its GDP and public debt at 113%. Now, what can happen next? Well, the far right is calling for French President Emmanuel Macron's resignation. So does the far left. But this is rather unlikely, as Emmanuel Macron had said before that he will sit as the president of France until the end of his term in 2027. So what other options does Emmanuel Macron have? Not really that many, and all of them are not great. One is to dissolve the National Assembly and call for snap parliamentary elections. And the other would be to call for a new prime minister and give him a chance to form a new government. But it is said that Lecornu was his last chance. Now, in the latest development, Lecornu was called back to meet with Macron, and Macron asked him to coordinate with other political parties to hold consultations to resolve this political crisis, and he has to do it by Wednesday. If not, we will be seeing if Macron will be will be asking a new prime minister to form a new government, or whether there will be new parliamentary elections, snap parliamentary elections. Now, this all happens with the far right rising in popularity, Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella, and these snap parliamentary elections could mean that they would actually get majority. So not many great options for Macron. This is also concerning for the entire region, for Poland, for Germany, because France's political stability also means the stability of euro, also means the stability of the economy of the entire European Union, and all of this in the context of the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine. We will see whether this political crisis will end soon, and by Wednesday we will probably get an answer of what will happen next.
Watch this space. Kazimierz Wyszek reporting from Paris. Thank you. The hot and dry summer may be over, but Poland's battle with drought has far from disappeared. With reservoirs low and rivers drying up, farmers across the country are feeling the impact of months without sufficient rainfall. And as John Todd reports, experts warn the severe weather will only become more frequent and costly.
Water levels reached new lows across Poland this summer. Here in the country's Mazurian Lake District, there's clear evidence, as this exposed sunken rowing boat shows. To the northeast, the Pisa River is drying up. Riverbanks widened earlier this year by up to 8 metres.
All the water is draining away instead of being retained. This is one problem, and another is that the annual water balance has changed for the worse.
It's a similar situation in Warsaw, where the Vistula River has notched up a series of new lows, falling from a record 15 centimetres in early summer to just 8 in September, a fraction of the 1.5 to 2 metres seen in previous years at the Warsaw measuring station. At the start of October, there are still 51 hydrological drought warnings in place across the country. Experts say warmer winters mean lower snowfall, leading to less water being retained to make up for shortfalls.
The weather patterns in Poland have changed. If you look at winters, we no longer have snow cover, and this is probably by far the most important impact factor that is causing the situation that we are right now.
But it is the Polish farmers who are suffering most. Figures from the government's Agricultural Restructurization and Modernization Agency, quoted by the Water Issues website, indicated that more than 133,000 claims were made under the 2023 drought aid programme, with farmers receiving compensation totalling nearly €10 million.
This year has been exceptionally difficult because the drought started in the spring. It continued through the first half of the summer, and then it rained during the second half. Harvesting was impossible. Now we are experiencing a psychological drought. It's getting worse year by year, both in terms of weather and profitability when it comes to the price of crop inputs. So it's getting harder and harder year by year.
The droughts are also impacting the environment. Some experts say better water catchment can be achieved by rewilding to boost biodiversity and restoring natural processes.
We need to make faster changes because we are running out of water. The more we can retain, the better. This includes everything from flower meadows and beavers to tree covers and reservoirs. The key is retention, not strengthening rivers. This requires changes to the way various institutions operate.
River users fear the worst.
Przyjeżdżam tutaj na ryby co roku, jest wody coraz mniej, a ten rok jest wyjątkowo suchy. No jest coraz gorzej.
It's like 5 centimeters in Warsaw. Well, it's a bit better here, but the fish are escaping. They're escaping. They're hard to catch.
Nie ma zim.
There are particularly no winters or snow. In earlier years there was snow and ice up to half a metre thick until April or May. Now the Vistula doesn't freeze at all in those shallows.
Environmentalists say that action is needed now to help minimise the impact of future droughts. John Todd for TVP World.
Earlier today, I spoke with Elina Valtton, Finland's Minister of Foreign Affairs. Here is that exclusive interview. You can also watch the full sit-down on YouTube and tvpworld.com. You're watching TVP World, and joining me now is the Finnish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Elina Valtton. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk says Ukraine's war is our war. Are Europe and Russia at war, at peace, or something in between?
Well, certainly Russia is very aggressive and projecting its aggression not just towards Ukraine, but also towards Europe, to the rest of the world. If I speak with my African colleagues, they are very concerned about Russia's actions in Western Africa, for instance. And to summarize, essentially they are posing aggression against the freedom of people.
It's interesting because just a few months ago we were talking about a potential ceasefire in Ukraine, peacekeeping troops on the ground. But can you see a ceasefire happening soon, or are we back at a kind of square one?
I would like to see a ceasefire happening as soon as possible, and I'm sure all Ukrainian people would like that to happen as well. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem very likely just now. Russia thinks that they have the upper hand, which they clearly don't have, especially not in the long term, looking at their economy, looking at how things are going. But at the same time, of course, Ukraine depends on the aid they are getting from the outside. At the same time, Ukraine is getting stronger by the day. If we look at their military industry, it's quite impressive. So yes, there should be a ceasefire leading to a genuine, lasting peace. And I guess also accountability, because that is the only thing which Russia has never had to encounter.
But you don't see that happening anytime soon? Or you can't see that as we sit here today?
Well, I'm not a prophet, but I don't see any indication of Russia ceasing its hostilities. On the very contrary, they have actually been just increasing their targeting of civilians. And it's, of course, extremely unfortunate.
What does a lack of peace in Ukraine mean for Europe? Because I'm thinking about these airspace incursions, these drone incursions, sabotage attempts, the shadow fleet. I mean, are we getting closer to a world where NATO, Article 5, this clause that an attack on one is an attack on all, has to be invoked?
Well, every time people speak about the activation of Article 5, they should also say what they want to have out of it, because clearly if we look at these hybrid activities that Russia has been engaged in over the course of the past months and years even towards the rest of Europe, it is extremely important that we also identify what the right remedy is, right? So now for Finland, I mean, we've had airspace incursions from the Russian side for years, right? We typically don't make a huge fuss out of it. Of course, we take it bilaterally, and if there was a severe threat to something which we hold dear, then of course we would act accordingly. So it's also extremely important that we, take things the way that we first analyze. We become aware of the situation across the alliance as well, and then see how we should act. But for instance, what comes to the recent drone attacks or drone incursions, I think the response that NATO has operationally been able to produce is exactly the right one. And this is, of course, something we should be continuing on. And we don't have to invoke Article 5 for that. We just have to make sure that our procedures work.
Do you see any evidence that Russia is using its shadow fleet to launch those drones?
Well, we are investigating each and every occurrence of these drones that we have observed in the past weeks. And sure, it could be the case that at least that they attempted to do so, because they have the shadow fleet, which is very much operating in the shadow, as we know it, also looking at the flag states. So it could be tempted to use those, yes.
Because I guess the question is, we see in the Baltic Sea Baltic Sentry, which was launched to deter or to counter the threat of the Shadow Fleet on the eastern flank. We now have Eastern Sentry and this proposed drone wall. But are these enough to deter Russia?
I guess what comes to proper deterrence of Russia, we need to think, first of all, long-term and second, strategic. And they're investing more heavily than we have been able to do before in defense and deterrence. And sure, I mean, Poland is leading the way here. Finland, of course, has also taken its security extremely seriously throughout the years, long before we joined NATO. So we just have to increase our pace, right? Ramp up our defense and deterrence, and also, work on a defense industry which is competitive, and also together with the Americans. So I guess that's the right response. But unfortunately, this coupled with the sanctions and our attempts to keep the Russian war industry at bay, it simply doesn't happen overnight. We just need patience with all these actions.
What about nuclear weapons? Is the current NATO setup fit for purpose, or do you want to see a specific European nuclear deterrence?
I wouldn't comment anything on nuclear deterrence. I think we are fine as we are now in NATO, and we have the US also fully committed to defending every inch of the alliance.
You mentioned the US. You were recently quoted as saying it is a given that the US will be out of Ukraine and out of Europe at some point. Do we need to accept that Ukraine and ultimately European security can no longer fully rely on the United States?
I think at the moment we can fully rely on the US support and alignment here. And also going forward, probably what comes to the previous topic of nuclear deterrence, we will be, depending on the Americans for the time being. But everything else we are able to do as Europeans is exactly in the right direction. And I think all the decisions that have been made this year, also in the NATO summit, but also through the European Union, those are the right ones.
On the war in Ukraine, President Vladimir Zelensky says Vladimir Putin is laughing at the West and its silence, and that there is no worthy international response to what is happening there. Is he right?
I think we should applaud on the level of support that we have been able to give to Ukraine. I mean, if we think about the situation 4 years back when Europe was still, building a gas pipeline with Russia, right? So we have been able to make a complete U-turn, and we have been more or less consensual on this strategy by which we aid Ukraine, at the same time weaken Russia's war machine through sanctions and other means, and also thirdly, build our own defense and deterrence. This is exactly the right track. But unfortunately, perhaps we haven't done enough. And also, I mean, all of us live in democracies. We have our budgetary constraints as well. We certainly weren't prepared for this. But I think the response, given what the background was still a few years ago, that the European countries and the entire alliance, also the coalition of the willing with covering countries from also beyond Europe, it's been, fantastic. So we should just, continue on this track and also be happy about what we have achieved, and more importantly, to do that in order to be able to continue on this track.
So do you agree that Vladimir Putin is mocking the West and its silence?
The Russian leaders' mindset is that that they always post these maximalist demands and then see how far they can advance without having to incur any kind of loss, for instance. And that certainly didn't happen with Ukraine. They thought that they would take Ukraine in a matter of a couple of weeks. Didn't happen. So now they are engaged in this war, which also brings in a lot of losses in terms of people, but also material. But the Russian mindset, unfortunately, is a very imperialistic one, as it is. And I guess the free world, including Finland and Poland, we should just be firm enough to tell them this can't be happening anymore.
Elina Valtton, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Finland, thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much.
And that's all for this exclusive interview here on World News Tonight. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.